Greetings everyone and welcome back to the post 365 Days of Prog series or whatever. And I guess that today we're not even doing an intro because the intro itself I guess is just not relevant. And if you're watching this video and you have no idea what I'm talking about, today I will basically be looking at 10 of my personal most hated albums from prog albums that I reviewed this year on the series of 365 Days of Prog. So if you haven't watched the series, you can go ahead and check out the channel, there's a lot to dive into. But yeah, today I'm gonna be ranking my personal top 10 worst album covers that I've seen this year. Of course, this is only my opinion, it is entirely subjective, you might think something else, but yeah, we will be starting at 10, which means least worst, and when we get to number 1, it means worst cover that I've seen this year. So without further ado, let's get right into the 10th spot. So coming in at number 10, we have the album Please Don't Touch by Steve Hackett. So it is amazing to me to think that this cover was made by the same person who made the cover for the debut album by Steve Hackett, that being 1975's Voyage of the Occulent, and that person of course being Kim Poor. Now I do know that many regard this cover as pretty good looking and there's a lot of merchandise surrounding it and stuff like that, but to me this one is pretty off-putting. The art style and the downright depressing colors on here really make just this big jumbled mess to me, especially when looked at from afar, which if your cover doesn't pass the look at it from afar and see how it looks test, then it's not really a good cover, isn't it? And in addition, and this might be a personal grudge, I think I dislike the text or the font that reads Steve Hackett at the top of this cover. It doesn't have anything to do with the old, somewhat Victorian, maybe even somewhat comical theme that's going along with this cover. This just looks so unrelated. And knowing this album and knowing how varied it can get with all its songs, I do believe that this album needed to complement that, not by having this messy cover as the album's art, but instead by having something more orderly and simple to really complement its overall aesthetic. So coming in at number 9, we have the album Detachment by the band Baroque Project. So sometimes the cover doesn't have to be downright ugly, although it does help to be a bad cover. And I do believe that that is the case with Baroque Project's 5th studio album called Detachment. But the thing that really issues me with this cover is just how lacking of personality it is. I don't know why they chose to make this cover like this, and I don't think that it represents the music quite well, but I digress. The thing is that this album just feels very disassociated with anything. You could literally take a usual pop, rock, blues, jazz, whatever, and put your needed titles in place of this text and it will basically look as fitting as this one. I don't get why using this female model and this very ambiguous pose doing something that I don't know what she's doing actually, is thought to be something that would be appealing to people. I really don't get it. And unfortunately, I guess this all ties back to the fact that I'm really not a big fan of all of Baroque Project's album covers. I just think that they could have done a better job with this one and with their album covers in general, much more like what they did back at the start of their career. Coming up next in the 8th spot, we have You Won't Believe What Happens Next by the band Arch Echo. So yes, definitely in these higher numbers in the ranking, we have covers that I personally find to be subjectively bad, but I would definitely understand why someone would see this as being good. And well, this album by Arch Echo is definitely one that I personally really dislike. Firstly, and maybe least importantly, we have the graphic design, which I'm really not a big fan of, and it just doesn't seem to me to be related to anything progressive, but in a more broader sense, it doesn't even look like the graphic design you'd find on an album cover that represents music. But secondly, and maybe more prominently, I think that it's the sort of narcissism that kind of seeps through this cover. So what I mean by that, we have the very simple idea, we have this mouse, he's taken some cheese from this rind that has the album name on it, and then he's just lying on the eraser listening to music. Now that would be fine, but then there's this sort of egoistic, narcissistic idea of putting the band logo on the MP3 and then also putting it just for good measure on the earphones themselves, so one might not mistake he's listening to our Checo and they're really good because he's enjoying himself. I don't know, I really don't like that. Maybe this wasn't even the idea that they came into this one with, but honestly, I don't think that it looks good, at least not with our persona. And looking at the back cover of this one, I also dislike it very much so, for its font and for many reasons, but we're basically only talking about the front covers here. So coming in at number 7, we have quite the popular band. This is the album cover for Thrack by King Crimson. So yes, this might be a bit of an unpopular take, but I really dislike this album cover. There is this sort of fine art when creating an album cover that is simplistic and minimalistic that you just kinda have to know how to do. You can definitely see it with albums like Atom Heart Mother, which has become iconic, or even the Velvet Underground and Nico, again very iconic, very simplistic. And you know what, for the heck of it, even King Crimson's 80s trilogy also follows those same guidelines. But this one, While I do believe that you can approach this cover and try and find its hidden meaning and go ahead and say, oh, this metal just reminds me of the idea of room, and I don't know, you can do that, but honestly what I see here is simplistic for the sake of being simplistic. They just someone took the photo of this and they were like, yeah, we can put the text on it and it'll be fine, but I really don't see anything personal and interesting about this very, very rudimentary cover. Coming up in the 6th spot, we have probably what is the most outstanding cover out of them all, and that is Amazing Guess by the band Chitos Magazine. So yes, while all of the album covers so far that I've shown you have been pretty consistently undersaturated and pretty brownish looking, even this one just really takes everything out of the water by being so vibrant and so lively. Yet I pretty much hate this cover. Well, maybe not hate, I think that hate is a bit of a rough word to use, but I really don't like it. And I think that usually covers get things wrong in the sense of being too depressing, being too shitty looking, being too undersaturated, but this one just takes it all the way to the other extreme. It looks so lively, it looks so colorful, it basically causes my blood sugar pressure to go up just by viewing this. Overall, this year I have from time to time encountered albums that were definitely overwhelming, just being too much for me. And well, this is basically the album cover equivalent of that. Now I will give Chitos Magazine this benefit of the doubt or something like that. I know that a part of their brand, if not a big part of their brand, is all surrounding this overly colorful, very sugar rushy sort of marketing, I guess. And when it comes down to it, they have done a good job objectively with this one here, but I personally just really dislike it, though I will admit that it does fit their music on this album quite well. Coming in at number 5, we have the band Renaissance before they were actually the Renaissance that we know and love, and with their second album called Illusion. So admittedly, this one was a bit of a late entry into the list. I just kind of forgot about it, maybe I was distracted by its pretty good looking back cover, but the fact of the matter is its front cover is really quite appalling. Yes, if you look online for versions of this cover, most of what you'd find are actually in this poop shaded color that it is, and well, I really don't like it. I think that the overall first impression that you get from this one is definitely quite rotten, and it doesn't really get better from there. There really are a bunch of things that all add up to why I dislike this cover so much. It has to do with the Renaissance logo and mainly with how it's colored that I don't like. The title of the album, nobody can read what it says. It looks so odd and you cannot definitely read it from afar. And the planets themselves, they're just kind of brown and they're really not that special. You could have done something with color, but you just chose not to. And maybe the only decent part about this one might be the boy walking on this spatial trail. But all in all, this front cover leaves much to be desired, not to say that the back cover is thus as well. The back cover is actually one that I quite like, and I do like the chemistry between the two, but when it comes down to it, I really don't get the gap between the two. Why the front one looks so bad while the back one looks so good. but well, I guess that's just a bigger question than I can answer. And coming in at number 4, we have Roger Waters and his album Amused to Death. Okay, wow, this is definitely when we're going into the territory of what I personally think at least is objectively bad looking covers. Now, as I said in the video reviewing this album originally, I actually for the longest time did not know that this was the original cover for this album, and I only knew the 2015 remastered version of it, which actually looks really good. But this, where do I start with this one? I literally don't know. Should I start with the fact that the image is uncensored, or with the fact that it looks like it was taken out from a home record camera, which is also really odd, and the overall quality of this one, I can never seem to find this album cover with a decent enough quality, and put with that the idea that is presented in here. I know there's this unique idea of Big Brother and the chimpanzee that is supposed to be watching TV throughout the album, but it's really such a minute thing on this album that I think that they should have focused on something more prominent, like the idea of society, God, or whatever, but they just didn't do so. I think that some of my bad reception of this album cover definitely comes from the fact that I love the remastered version of it, but still, objectively looking at this one, I think that it's quite appalling. Coming in at number 3, we have A Storm Is Coming by Bjorn Rees. So honestly, when I first saw this album cover, I really didn't think much of it. I was like, yeah, this is verging on sexuality in this edgy way, but okay, I guess it's fine. But then I noticed the drops. Yes, it only took this album 2 drops to make it from being not that good to being really, really bad in my opinion, and to grant it this 3rd ranking on the list. I really dislike this. Yes, you can say that the drops are drops of rain from the storm, but honestly, let's be fair, this is probably somewhat of a bodily excrement. And when looking at this one, it just seems inappropriate to some extent. It doesn't seem sexual for art's sake, it just seems sexual for sexuality's sake. And coming back to what I said about Arch Echo's album cover, I also find this one to have somewhat of an egotistic element to it. Like, yeah, this album is so good it's gonna make you wet, hahaha. No, it's really not that good. It's a pretty bad album actually, and the cover itself just enhances that even more. Coming in at 2nd place, the second to last entry on this list, we have the album Peace by Zingale. Oof, this is a hard one, but to be fair, this cover was somewhat meant to be ugly, so I guess it succeeded. But yeah, this is the album cover for Zingale's one and only album in their discography called Peace, and seeing as this is how they decided to use their only limited slot of discography album covers, I really think that mistakes were made here. This painting of the hippie Jew black-faced junkie just deters everything and everyone that probably looks at this one. It looks so freaking bad. Now, I will admit this album cover has become quite iconic in time, but I think it mostly stands to the fact that this is a really obscure band that is really good in some regards as well, so the album cover just kinda enhances their obscurity and it looks so odd, but to be honest, I wouldn't really want to blame the band on this one. They were supposed to sign this big deal with a worldwide publisher for this album, but instead they just kinda were dropped out at the last moment and they had to release this one, and they all stated that they hated this cover, but they just didn't really have a lot of options and it had to be released with this one. I think that there were like efforts or even reissues of this album with a different cover, but I couldn't really find any of that, or at least proof that that really ever happened. So yeah, we're left with this pretty horrifying looking album cover. And lastly, in 1st place, we have the album Mask by the band Kansas. So yeah, in general, I wouldn't say that Kansas have the most great looking album covers out there, but I would also say that they have pretty solid looking covers to their name. But this one is just an ugly blot to tarnish it all. Let's try and break it down bit by bit, starting off with the most obvious thing, and that's the painting. So this is a painting by Italian painter Giuseppe Arcimboldo, and it is called Water, and it comes to us from the 4 painting series called 4 Elements. Now quickly going through Arcimboldo's Oeuvre, it actually is a pretty impressive one. He does these portraits that are also collages of various items and stuff like that, and they all look pretty nice. All at least until it comes to the 4 Seasons series. Each of the 4 paintings looks horrifying, honestly horrifying. You can go ahead and check it out on Google and Wikipedia or stuff like that, but I wouldn't really recommend it. And I think that the worst looking one has to be this one, the one representing water. And of course, what did Kansas do? They chose just that one to be on this album cover. And in addition, they also decided that this album should be held to some high regard, so it cannot blend with the rest of this cover, so they decided to put this very unflattering thin white outline around it. And you know what, just for good measure, let's put yet another outline, and let's put this big red outline just so everyone knows that this is an album cover. Personally, I also dislike the band name on top and the way that it's written, but I can get around with that. But the one thing I really don't get is how the album's title is written. It is located at the bottom left corner, the place where nobody would be looking for it. It is small, it is in cursive, no one would be able to understand what's written there, especially when looking from afar, and honestly it just adds to the entire aesthetic of this album cover being really bad looking, like almost intentionally bad. And honestly, to be entirely truthful with you, when listening to this album, I was kind of glad that it wasn't really that good, because I was not ready of acquiring a vinyl copy of this one and having it sit around with the rest of my beautiful covers. But yeah, that's about it for me. I really don't like doing these worst top 10s, but I guess they're just some sort of mandatory top 10s because you can really only appreciate the good when talking about its complementary bad. But again, just to emphasize this, I think that all of these picks are truly just subjective to me. You might love all these covers, you might love some of them, you might hate them more than I do, and well, that's your opinion, and well, you're entitled to it. Now, one might notice that I actually did not include Love Beach by ELP on here, and yes, that's because I don't think it's that bad of a cover, at least not in comparison to what we've looked at today, and honestly I will be defending this album to my grave. But yeah, anyways, to contrast this, tomorrow we will be taking a look at my personal top 10 favorite or best album covers that we've seen this year, so stay tuned for that. But with that being said, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'd like to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wanham, Rist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys, have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.